Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about maintenance phases. But before we do that, we just wanted to say hello. Even though we've had episodes come out every single Tuesday, we have not recorded for how many weeks now? Three, two?
It feels like a month, but I think it's really just three. It
Yeah.
feels like it's been a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was like,
So,
I'm nervous. Like I was kind of like getting anxious before like jumping on. I was like, am I gonna remember how to talk today?
hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so. But yeah, it's been a well-deserved break, and I think we kind of needed it too because we were in a really solid routine of just like getting on week after week and sometimes knocking out two. But it was really good timing that we did take this break and just kind of front loaded some episodes because my semester has been ramping up and I'm on the tail end of it. I think it's what, like 19 days left of
Mhm.
not even, I think maybe just like 2.5 weeks, something like that for the semester. So almost there. And so it's been nice to just kind of have that extra time, but I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, I am too. And kind of like you were saying, there were a lot of, I think, transitions for us and a lot of stuff going on. So the fact that having that break was really nice. But we have, after this, well, I guess we have 5 more weeks of the school year for us, and then we're done in May, and you're finishing up your semester and you're not doing summer classes, correct?
Yeah, I'm not doing any, just getting back into a work from home routine, which I am super stoked for.
Yeah, me too. And so actually, draw results came out for New Mexico. So we have a lot of hunts this summer and in December and January. So we have that to look forward to as well. So got a lot of traveling.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you want
So
to tell us about how your cut's going?
yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is kind of the opposite of the topic, but just for update purposes. So, I am, what is it now? Probably 10 out of 12 weeks into my cut. And it's been a grind. I've been pushing a lot. And the biggest factor in seeing progress has honestly been sleep and stress management. And because nutrition really like never changed, never wavered. Like I've always been 100% with that through the whole cut. But it really does come down to, for me, am I getting 8 hours of sleep per night? Am I managing stress? And the answer is sometimes. So I've been really dialing in on that lately and just been making better decisions about where I'm allocating my time, how I'm spending my evenings winding down. And that has contributed to breaking through a lot of plateaus. So right now I'm sitting close to 10 pounds down in 10 weeks or so. So we've been pretty aggressive, but looking forward to hopefully finishing strong. And my birthday's coming up next Friday on the 30th. So this will come out the Tuesday prior, but going to be having a free day for that and then finishing strong. So excited to also indulge a little bit too.
Yeah, and that's especially super nice after being so strict for a long time.
Yeah, so not going to go super crazy, but I've been kind of like playing around with ideas of what I might want to have, and it's not gonna fit my cutting numbers, I'll tell you that. But yeah, so getting into the topic at hand, flipping from cutting now to maintenance. So you guys probably know from listening to a number of our episodes that this is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and it is something that I am thoroughly looking forward to getting back to. And we have used this analogy multiple times, but to kind of start off this conversation, I think it would be good to recap the park bench versus bus bench analogy that I think I did steal from 3DMJ. Now that I'm like thinking back, and since we've alluded to it a number of times, not taking credit for it, but it is a great analogy. So just explaining that a little bit for you guys. Basically, your park bench is your maintenance phase. It's your phase where you're not really pursuing any big goal. And it is a time that is a little bit more idle and you're not really striving for anything specific. And the analogy is, you're sitting on the park bench, you're looking around, you're admiring the birds, and you're just enjoying being there. And that is kind of the mood and the, I guess, emotions surrounding it that you want to have, rather than being on a bus bench where obviously a bus is taking you somewhere. So that's when you're goal oriented, when you're driven towards something specific, you have an end date, a deadline, something of that nature. And so what's important here is the mindset of being on a park bench versus a bus bench. And oftentimes I think people think that they need to be on a bus bench all the time, or they need to have this goal to keep them motivated, when in reality, living a healthy lifestyle really does come down to those park bench phases. And if you're able to have that mindset of just enjoying being where you're at and going through the motions, living the lifestyle, and not really chasing anything down that is that specific, you can be really successful in the long term. So that is the park bench analogy that we love so much.
Yeah, I think that was a really good wrap up. And if 3MJ is okay with it, I definitely want to make that a little hashtag for us and do a little park bench gang. But yeah, I think that's really going to frame the whole conversation that we're going to have today. And so I think when a lot of people think to a diet and what they're doing in the gym, they think of it in terms of I'm either dieting, I'm in a fat loss phase, or I'm bulking. So it's either one or the other. And they kind of leave out that middle ground, which is the maintenance phase. And I understand why, because a lot of times when we go into the gym or when we approach our eating, we want to have a goal. And it makes sense because we want to progress in some way. And so it is, you want to say, okay, well, I'm in a fat loss phase, so therefore I'm cutting food and I'm doing a lot of cardio and I'm doing this in the gym. Or if you're bulking, you say, okay, well, I'm going to eat all of this food and I'm going to lift super heavy and I'm not going to do any cardio at all. And trying to find that middle ground, but it's hard to stay there sometimes because you feel like when you're in that maintenance phase, when you're not really doing anything fancy with your food, it stays the same for week after week after week, and you're doing the same programming week after week. You're not really doing a whole lot of cardio, but you're not doing none at all. But it's hard because you don't really feel like you're making any progress. So it's hard to stay in that phase and to stay motivated.
Well, that, and you're probably not seeing changes as quickly, right? Because when you're bulking, you're either actually adding muscle or you are adding an unnecessary amount of fat and justifying it as muscle, or
been there.
or you're cutting and you're seeing changes week to week, you're seeing new lows on the scale. So it's really hard to get away from those, I guess, outcome oriented goals and processes, because it's a lot easier to constantly be striving towards something, but it's exhaustive. You can't constantly be chasing after something with your body, because ultimately you're just going to be led into probably body dissatisfaction if you are constantly chasing after one thing, then the next, and not just taking the time to like really sit there and enjoy what you're doing. And so that kind of, I think, goes into our theme of being very process focused and enjoying the process and really, appreciating where you're at now, even though you have goals for the future. We have that theme of sustainability in there with this podcast, with our coaching. And so, it's really important to be able to take that pause. Like, I really do think that a maintenance phase for a lot of people is more of a challenge than a cut or a bulk. I think a lot of people find it easier to strive towards something and have that outcome based goal. And it's really, really, really hard for people to conceptualize why maintenance is important or the benefits of it, or just being able to do that, period. So hopefully today we can give you guys better insight as to how you can actually enjoy this time frame if this is the phase that you're in right now.
Yeah, and we understand it too, because we can sometimes fall into this trap. And I think a lot of people are very type A, especially competitors. And so they want to constantly be doing something, be striving for progress and for making changes. And when you're in this maintenance phase, like Marissa said earlier, you're not really seeing changes. And so you feel stagnant. You feel like you're not progressing. And so in our minds, it's like, well, if I'm not progressing, then I'm failing. Like I'm not doing something. So I need to do something. And so I think, again, that's kind of the trap that people get caught up in. And I think too, we get caught in these cycles where it's okay, well, I bulked, I put on muscle or, sometimes fat. And okay, well, now I'm going to diet. And so, okay, now my diet's over. Well, now I got to bulk. And so you get caught in yo-yoing almost. And so that's what we want to talk to you guys about today, is breaking that cycle and trying to enjoy that maintenance phase. So talking about what a maintenance phase is, I think would be really important. And we have talked about that in length, but doing a little recap and then talk about why we should do there, how you can make progress and everything else that kind of goes into it.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to figure out, okay, well, where are these expectations to cut and bulk coming from? And a lot of it, I think, comes from the fact that bodybuilding is one of the most prevalent, I guess, sources of fitness information and inspiration in the industry. So a lot of bodybuilders are coaches for lifestyle clients. And so bodybuilding by nature is a cyclic sport in terms of your body weight. It is literally intentionally yo-yoing back and forth to bulk and to cut. Definitely more drastically pronounced in men. Women, I think, can definitely get away with just being at maintenance and making the progress that they need to make. But especially with the males, it's like they're bulking up to 250 pounds and then they're cutting down to 180 and then they're on stage and then they're like, okay, I got to get my weight higher next time if I want more muscle. And they're just constantly yo-yoing. And so I think we get these expectations that like, oh, that's what you should do because that's what the pros are doing, right? But in reality, a lot of you guys just want to live a healthier lifestyle and to be able to sustain something for the long term. And that doesn't require going back and forth, right? And so I think your point too is, what is a maintenance phase? That's a good jumping off point to like get into definitions.
Well, I was going to point out that I definitely understand that pressure that you get either from social media, being a competitor myself, because that's exactly how I was when I first started competing. I dieted down, and then you get to, I mean, I was 107 pounds. I went from like 135 to 107, and that was, I don't think I'd weighed that since like middle school. And I mean, I was teeny tiny, and then you start introducing more food and the scale goes up and you're like, oh my God, and you're uncomfortable because and I think I got up to like 127 or something like that, which is still lower than what I had originally started at, but I felt uncomfortable. I felt like I held a lot more fat and I wasn't comfortable. And so I was just like, well, when are we prepping again? And I started prep and I did the exact same thing the next time. And I didn't really make a whole lot of progress as a competitor because I didn't give myself a lot of time and I never enjoyed. I didn't have a maintenance phase. It was just a cycle. It's either cutting or bulking. And that's just really not a healthy place to live because you miss out on a lot of things. But I definitely understand. And especially now, even as a competitor, and I had taken a lot of time off, but I still get people now that ask me like, do you have any plans to prep? Do you have any plans? When are you prepping again? When are you prepping again? And so it's hard because you feel like not only do you have this pressure from yourself, but now you have it from other people and the expectations that other people have for you. And it's really hard. And I think also, I'm going off on a little tangent, but I know, Marissa, that you and I experience this, and I know that other coaches do too, that we sometimes feel like we have to look the part. And sometimes it's hard to stay in a maintenance phase or go into a bulking phase because you feel like that's going to affect your coaching business because you think that that is part of your marketing, which it is to an extent. But that's why I think that the maintenance phase is almost more important for a coach to be able to walk the talk, is so to speak, and be able to stay in this in between. You're not having to do one or the other, but you're just living in this kind of healthy, balanced lifestyle.
Yeah, I can definitely relate there. And honestly, like I had people ask me like all through last year, I finished my cut and then I basically spent the rest of the year at maintenance. People would always ask me in the summer, oh, how's training going? They're expecting an answer of like, oh, well, what are you doing now? And I'm like, just living, Like, what are you training for? That was a question I got all the time because I post my workouts to my stories like every single day that I train. And so I always get questions like, oh, well, what are you training for? And like literally my answer was just like to be healthy, to like not have injuries, to build muscle. Like that was literally it. Like that was my answer. And people were like super underwhelmed by it. But like that was my answer for literally most of the year.
I just imagine that meme of the guy doing the pec deck machine and he's like, I'm gonna be so good at hugging.
Pretty much.
Yeah, but it's you're training for life, which is, it's not exciting, it's not sexy, but it's part of that, just living a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's answer that question. What is maintenance? And so
Mhm.
this is a really loaded question because it looks really different for everyone. And maintenance is portrayed really differently on social media than I think my experience with it has been. So what is maintenance? What is this thing we call hashtag balance? Like, how do we maintain our weight and, be successful in this phase? So maintenance is essentially where your calories that you're taking in, that you're eating, are the same as you're outputting. Now that sounds simple, but on a day-to-day basis, our expenditure varies. We might have one day where, and so an example of myself, one day where I go into the lab for my part-time work and I'm walking around, I'm helping people out with clients and all of that. And then I come home, I work from home half the day, then I go to the gym. That's like a more active day for me, right? And then I have some days of the week where I stay home all day and I'm in a chair all day. I don't move and my steps are super low and like my expenditure is just more sedentary. And so day one to day two, for example, my total expenditure for the day is probably different. So like my quote unquote maintenance calories, they're more so a set number to estimate what maintenance looks like for your whole week, I think is a better way to look at it. So on average, my expenditure for the week is roughly around some X amount of calories. And then my day-to-day intake just stays the same so that on average for the week, I'm basically getting exactly what I need to maintain my weight. And you just monitor this by making sure the scale is not going up or down. And when I say that, that's also loaded because going up or down might mean one week your average weight is higher because you were PMSing. So your average weight might be 1.5, 2 pounds higher. The next week, it might be down below a certain point. And so your maintenance is a range. It's going to be probably above and below a certain point that you hover around by like a pound or even 2 pounds. So it might be like a 4 pound range above or below a certain point.
Yeah, and we're going to go ahead and tell you again why we think that it's important to weigh yourself daily. And that's because you can kind of check that range and you can say, okay, like this week my average was this, well, this week my average was up, but like maybe what could have affected that? Was I not sleeping very well? Was I really stressed? And then if you're able to kind of bring it back down the following week or in a couple weeks, again, you're staying within that range that Marissa was talking about. But if the scale continues to trend up and trend up week after week, well, then you're probably not at maintenance calories. So again, it's important, and that's not to say that you have to remain that same weight, average weight every single week, but again, just looking for trends.
Yeah, and I definitely find this with myself when my calories get high, or high for me, I tend to notice like at a certain threshold, I start to just kind of gain weight week after week after week. And then I realize, okay, well, I'm not at maintenance, I'm in a surplus. So what do I need to do there in order to just kind of reel things back in and make sure that that increase week to week doesn't keep happening? First of all, my advice for that is don't change things too quickly. Maintenance is really a good time to allow yourself to be patient and wait numbers of weeks before you're actually making a change to macros. So, if your weight goes up on average, one week to the next, and you're in a maintenance phase, it doesn't mean slash your calories the next week to bring it back down. It just means hold steady, control the variables that you can control. Like I said, stress management, sleep, hydration, and actually being adherent and not like forgetting to log a bunch of extra bites that you took of something. Guilty, and especially in maintenance guilty, we're going to get into that. And so not changing things, but just bringing back a little bit more control. And then from there, if things even out, then you don't have to change anything. So really being patient with it week to week and not jumping to conclusions, because it's easier to do that when you're in a fat loss phase, because it's like, oh, I didn't see progress, let's make a change. And, we've talked about that. But in this phase, it really does take a longer term approach, even when it comes to making little adjustments like that.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, like you were saying, like what can I do to make sure that I'm actually maintaining? Like, am I being on point with my nutrition? Am I getting a little sloppy and not tracking, bites here and there, or just not tracking in general? And then the other thing too that you just made me think of is sometimes, and I'll have clients who come to me and they say, well, I don't understand why maintaining, I'm not able to eat as much as this person, because they're in their maintenance phase and they're eating 400 grams of carbs, and I feel like I get capped out at 200. And so why that is, and so sometimes, like Marissa was talking about, it's her lifestyle. Like there are some days where she doesn't move a whole lot, and there are other people where they're trainers and they do, F45 classes or Orange Theory, or they're on their feet all day long, and they might get a daily average of like 15,000 steps. And that's normal for them. That's a normal day. And so they're going to have a lot higher food intake than us. And so if our intake or our steps are like around 2, 3, 4,000, then we're probably not going to have as high as food. So I think that's one thing to consider too, is lifestyles.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note too, and we've talked about this with our NEAT podcast, as well as like managing your steps for fat loss. But if you have a daily step tracker, if you're below 5,000 steps for the day, your metabolism is not going to use food quite as well as if you had increased that to about 6 or above. Basically, below 5,000 steps is categorized as a sedentary lifestyle. When you're sedentary and you're not moving a lot, you're not allowing your body to like use the fuel that you're giving it, because you're eating to fuel what you're doing, right? And if you're not having any activity throughout the day, what's going to happen to that fuel? There's a higher likelihood that it's going to be stored as fat. And that's not to scare you, but that is one of the major contributing factors to our obesity epidemic. And so if you do have a step tracker, it's very highly advisable to get a baseline and try to be at or above 5,000 steps per day, so you're not at that sedentary threshold and not, putting yourself at risk for just gaining weight unnecessarily. You actually have proven better appetite regulation, as well as just metabolism when you are a little bit more active. So it's nothing crazy. Like 5,000 steps is not hard, but it does require conscious effort.
Yeah, and I think too, when you are in this maintenance phase and you're not particularly interested in fat loss, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in, well, I need to do absolutely nothing, no cardio, no movement, because I'm trying to get my food as high as possible. And I'm trying to make sure that when I start to implement cardio, that my body like reacts to it very quickly. And it is true to an extent. You shouldn't be doing an hour of cardio every single day to maintain. But at the same time, we talk about maintenance. Maintenance is just kind of enjoying healthy habits and things that contribute to a healthy lifestyle. So part of that is movement. It's still training, still getting in walks and getting in your NEAT, but it doesn't have to be extreme. It doesn't need to be like we talked about 20,000 steps, but it shouldn't be on the opposite end of the spectrum and be like 2,000 or 3,000. So just getting up and moving throughout the day, but it doesn't have to be anything too intense.
I think that is a really good jumping off point too, to answer that question, like what is balance? So balance in exercise as well as balance in nutrition. So balance in exercise is exactly what you just said, right? Like a sustainable amount of activity that meets physical activity guidelines, as well as something, it's an amount that doesn't cause you like undue stress that you have to get in. Because, for example, right now I'm pushing myself to get 10,000 steps per day during my cut because that's a big challenge for me and it forces me to move more. It's very hard. Sometimes I get on the treadmill that I literally bought so that I wouldn't have to walk outside alone at night for my apartment. Sometimes I'm getting on that thing at like 9:30 p.m. and I'm like, I really don't want to do this, but I'm low on my steps and I want to finish this because I made a commitment to myself. And that is very uncomfortable for me. So if I said during a maintenance phase, 10,000 steps is what I'm going to do, that would not make sense. I can't enjoy my life fully with that conscious effort and that big load of steps hanging over my head. So when I was in my maintenance phase, having about a goal of 7,000 was very, very realistic for me. It pushed me to still go on some walks and not be a total sloth, but it was maintainable. I could enjoy it. I could hit it realistically every single day without stressing about it. And so that is what balance was for me, for my lifestyle and what I could handle for activity. Now, for nutrition, this brings up an interesting thought process for me because when I'm talking to clients about maintenance, oftentimes getting away from tracking macros is a part of that picture because most people don't think that they can maintain forever, tracking macros. And as you shouldn't, right? Like you shouldn't have to track macros for the rest of your life in order to maintain your weight. However, and I'm going to skip ahead here, this brings up my favorite question that I like to discuss. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Christina, because I don't know if we've discussed this in depth before, but is it possible to achieve weight maintenance without some kind of a quantitative or measurable approach to basically moderating your nutrition in the environment that we live in today? And today we live in an obesogenic environment, an environment that is conducive to making people fatter. That is the society, at least in the United States, that we have. And so is it possible to achieve #balance, to achieve maintenance without any sort of measurement? And my personal answer is no. I think there has to be some kind of habit-centered approach or methodology or some kind of routine that you stick to that monitors the way that you eat and allows you to be conscious of your decisions. That can be macro tracking, but that can be a ton of other, basically my favorite question is it possible to maintain without some kind of a quantitative approach or moderation in some manner? That doesn't have to be tracking macros, but some kind of plate planning or routine or habits that you have in place in order to moderate your nutrition. I don't think it's possible. I don't really think it's possible without some kind of moderator or basically mentality or lifestyle that allows you to stay healthy and fit in the environment that we have today. 100 years ago, maybe not, but I think that really contributes to this question of what is maintenance and what is balance, because we have to have something in place, which again, for most clients is not tracking macros, but transitioning out of that, what do we do instead in order to make sure that we are staying accountable and not letting things get out of hand? And I think this is where people really, really struggle. And so some things that I have clients do, to list them off really quickly, is I have clients track their servings of protein. So not even like plugging things into an app, but like one serving that's a fist size, two servings that are a fist size, three, try to get, 4 per day, and then, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. Or plate planning, having the rule of threes on your plate and doing that 3 times per day. Different things that you can implement, or making simple swaps, using the quote unquote order smarter when you're eating out, using tools like that basically to moderate yourself and learning what you can get away with essentially, on the weekends, drinking, having meals out, that sort of thing, and learning how to balance that in the context of your life. It's very, very, very hard, especially when you take the numbers away from it. So sometimes learning how to do it with numbers is the first step to then transitioning out. But what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that Eric Helms has, and we've talked about his idea of flexibility. And so I think he's also made a reference to having like a dial. And so you have your dial, and so you have, like, again, the extremes of like not doing anything, eating whatever you want, not tracking anything, not caring, and you can get a little bit carried away. And so we want to turn that dial up a little bit. And so we want it to sit right in the middle. So we're not all the way cranked up where we're in like prep mode, where we're tracking everything 110%. We're doing all of this cardio, we're killing it in the gym. And then, I mean, I feel like when you're in that phase, other areas of your life suffer because you were dedicating so much time to how you look and all in your performance and all of this stuff. So we want to dial it to right into the middle. So it's not that we're not caring and eating whatever we want, but we're also not eating, spinach and chicken and broccoli for every single meal. But we're trying to find that nice, happy balance where, maybe we are going out to eat a little bit more with our friends and family because we have that balance. And we may not order a huge pizza for just ourselves, but maybe we have something, I don't know, like a burger and fries, and we skip dessert. Or maybe you have a lettuce burger and fries, so you can have dessert, or a uncracked meal once a week or something like that, where you may not be 100% accurate, but you're having that flexibility and you're able to enjoy, again, this maintenance phase in your life where you don't have to be too extreme on one side or the other. So that's kind of what balance means to me, is still making healthy choices and those healthy habits that we've instilled, but finding that nice happy medium. And that's going to look different for everyone. Some people may be pretty strict throughout the week because they enjoy that, and then they like having 1 or 2 untracked days or meals on the weekends, and they're sitting at maintenance and they're okay with that. So it's finding what works best for you.
Yes, and that's a great point. Finding what you can get away with. And this is going to be frustrating for some people who are in my or Christina's shoes, where we don't really get away with a lot. We have to kind of be a little bit more regimented. Otherwise, we do end up gaining weight that we don't want, right? So it's a balance between, okay, well, what amount of body fatness essentially are you comfortable with, right? Like if you're comfortable with being a little thicker, being a little heavier, you're obviously going to have a little bit more leeway to be more flexible. But if you want to keep things tight, you want to keep things lean, you're going to probably have to exercise a little bit more restraint overall in order to maintain that. I'll use an example that I always use when I'm talking about figuring out what I could get away with. And to be honest, it wasn't a lot. But not even last summer, 2 summers ago, oh my gosh, 2019, when we were traveling for a lot of beach volleyball tournaments over the summer, I was basically traveling every weekend. And so I made a deal with myself, basically, that I could have an untracked or like more indulgent meal once every 4 trips. And that was very, very, very hard. Or like one meal out of each weekend could be a little bit more indulgent. And that's very hard when you're traveling and you're eating out for every single meal. So literally for all of my meals except for one, I was ordering quote unquote smarter. I was getting the chicken breast salad. I was getting the chicken or fish sandwich that was broiled instead of fried, right? And so I was making those swaps, and then one meal per weekend, or one, I guess, trip per month, I was being a little bit more lax with myself. And that was what allowed me to maintain my weight. But it's very hard. Like when you think about that, like I'm someone who can't really get away with a lot. And probably a lot of you guys can relate. You're the type of person where you say, oh, I just look at a cookie and I gain 10 pounds. Like I relate to that wholeheartedly. And that is what I had to do to achieve my maintenance at that point. And I was tracking macros all of the other days of the week. That is the level of restraint that I needed to have in order to maintain the body composition I wanted. Had I been okay with being a little heavier, could have been more lax. But that really just depends on you, your preferences, and then what level of restraint is mentally healthy for you. And then how does that all fit together? So that's a very hard question to answer. What is balance? But that's what it was for me.
And I think balance is hard too, because there is so much of that gray area And a lot of times people like the black and white. We like rules, we like structure. Like, I can't do this and I can do this. And so it's hard when you're in this kind of like, well, it's up to me. I can make these decisions. But that's why I think that this maintenance mindset and these maintenance phases are so important, because it allows you to learn more about yourself and, is this truly a lifestyle, and what swaps can I make? And so it's like, okay, well, I didn't do great here, but how can I improve next time? Or I mean, next week, because we're doing this maintenance phase for a while.
Oh yeah. And I think, thinking about, is this a lifestyle for me? And what you said there, I think one thing to really touch on is falling into kind of that all or nothing mindset. And so this is where people really struggle with maintenance, is when they've been all or nothing for, however many years that they've been yo-yo dieting, and they are either all in and they're, doing keto, they're doing intermittent fasting, like they are all in, all the rules are in place, they're not deviating from a single one. But as soon as they're done with the diet, they are off. And that's the other thing that people bounce between, and I think is even more common than cutting and bulking, is dieting or not giving an F. And like that is even more damaging, right? Because then you basically learn that you're either on a restrictive, miserable diet, or you are basically not taking care of your health whatsoever. And so this is, really turning that dial into the middle. And for a lot of people, the reality is that dial might be turned more so to 60, 75% than 50. And for a lot of people, it does take a little bit more self-restraint, a little bit more mindfulness and cognizance of what you're doing at all times in order to achieve that maintenance. One, because of the environment that we live in, like I talked about, my favorite question, but two, because otherwise you're probably going to, dial back into that, I'm just going to do nothing, screw it, it's not worth it. So I know for me and for a lot of people, it does take, the middle of the dial is more so like 60, 75%, not 100, but definitely not like 40, 50.
Yeah. And again, talking about that all or nothing, we've talked about before that we would rather have a client, instead of them being 100% in like intense and I'm going to go to the extremes and I'm all in, I'd rather have someone who's just kind of sitting there in the middle and can work out and is comfortable with, 3 workouts a week and this balanced kind of lifestyle, who is going to continue that for a long period of time, versus the client who's going to burn themselves out and then do absolutely nothing, eat whatever they want and not touch weights for, 6 months. So again, it's trying to find what works for you, try not to compare yourself to other people or social media or what their expectations of maintenance is. It's what your maintenance is.
Oh yeah. And I think there's like two more things that I think are really important to touch on. Is one, like you said, sometimes just going through the motions, like going to the gym 3 times per week. Maybe you're not feeling it, but you just still go because that's a realistic thing that you can do no matter what your life looks like. Sometimes that's okay. And we're not sitting here saying that like our training is awesome all the time. Like, especially during those maintenance phases, it's kind of a lull, like you're on that park bench, sometimes you just have to get in and do the thing and not really like be super enthusiastic about it, but like it's just a part of your day, it's a part of your week, and you just go through the motions. Same thing with nutrition. Sometimes you show up at a restaurant and you don't want to order something that's a little bit healthier or smarter, but it's going to be more beneficial for you in the long run. So using delayed gratification to keep yourself on track, it's a lot harder when you're not cutting and when you're not doing something for a specific goal, but it still applies. It's still something that you have to do during maintenance in order to really be successful at it. And the final thing I wanted to say was, maintenance isn't really just maintenance, because you're always progressing, even though, and we've said a number of times, you don't feel like you're seeing changes, you don't feel like you're making progress. The reality of it is if you keep training, you're making progress, you're building muscle. And for competitors, this is the most important season. And so for Christina and I, our off seasons, our maintenance phases are the most important part of us getting on stage the next time and actually looking different, because this is the time where muscle is built. This is the time where your body actually changes. And so this is where you see those transformations of like, oh, one picture to the next, same weight, different body composition. And so a lot can happen. It just happens really slowly. So give yourself a year of trying to maintain, keep your weight relatively the same, but keep training, keep making good choices and eating a high protein diet, fruits, vegetables, and staying active. And you will watch your body transform over the course of a year, but you're not going to notice it week to week or day to day. You're going to notice it month to month. And sometimes not even that. You're going to notice it 6 months from now. You're going to notice it 12 months from now. And that is what maintenance really is slow improvement.
And I would argue that a lot of women can make a lot of really, really big changes here, because I think that, again, as women, we don't go through the same type of extremes that men do, where we're not bulking and putting on all of this extra weight. That we tend to prefer to be a tiny bit like more trim. And when you're in this maintenance phase where you're not really changing a whole lot, you can still make a lot of changes to your body composition. So we take a little bit less emphasis on weight, because in a maintenance phase, you actually might put on weight. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's because you're in a surplus, but it might be because you're building muscle. But it's just hard to notice over time. And that's why it's really important to take progress pictures and compare and see where you're growing. As you know, is it only your stomach, or are your lats getting wider, or your quads getting bigger? How are your glutes developing? Things like that. But Brett Contreras, right? He's made a lot of posts on females who make, I mean, incredible changes to their body. And you would think that they just dieted down, but nothing changed. They just week after week are going into the gym, training hard, and they're having those healthy habits, and they're still able to exercise some balance and in eating out, and, you know, going out and doing all these things, but they're still able to make a lot of changes. So, I think it's important to sometimes pull away again from one extreme to the other and sit in that maintenance phase for a while. And you might be surprised at the progress you can make there.
Yeah. And I think a good rule of thumb for maintenance is if you're gaining less than or equal to 1 pound per month, you're doing things pretty well. You're doing things really, really well. And those gains over time, they might add up to a couple more pounds than you'd like to see on the scale. But like Christina said, it's going to look a hell of a lot better because you're actually building muscle and fueling your body right.
Yeah. So body composition is very, very real. And something that you to strive for in a maintenance phase. So it's sometimes, like we were talking about, sometimes feels like you're not making any progress, but this is actually when you can make the most.
Yes, absolutely. So I think to wrap up, learn to actually eat enough. So your maintenance calories are higher than you think they are. I promise you that. For most women, they're at least 1,800 to like 2,200 calories. For some women with more active lifestyles or adaptive metabolisms, even more. If you're a man, above that. And learn to enjoy your life with fitness in the picture. Don't just make it a big fad diet every 3 months, you know, make it something sustainable. So really goes back to the theme of this podcast, but just enjoying proper nutrition at a maintenance level is a new thing for a lot of people. And it's something that we strongly, strongly encourage.
Yeah, and it's easy to fall into the trap of wanting to do one or the other, having a more structured goal, but trying to just think about that delayed gratification and not let anyone else pressure you into doing anything else. So it's hard. It's hard because we want to cut, because that's when we see that very fast progress, but maintenance is where it's at.
Yeah.
You can focus on life.
Yeah. Oh my God. Other areas of your life. You can
quality of life.
Devote energy to other areas of your life. What a thought.
Like your business or your career, your job, your family, your spouse, your relationship. So a lot of other things to consider.
So, Christina, I know that we've talked about this at length for you and your business in particular, but did you want to expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I would go back to is thinking about how basically all of 2020 I was prepping, and I was towards the end was doing quite a bit of cardio, was doing a lot in the gym, and a lot of areas in your life kind of suffer when you're spending so much time dedicated to your health and fitness. And so it's really difficult to have the time and energy to put forth into something like your career or your business. And that was something that I experienced, was I wasn't able to really do, or not do, but I feel like commit to being the best possible coach or business owner. And so all of this year, 2021, it's been just absolute night and day that I have time. I'm not spending hours doing cardio. I'm not spending hours in the gym and hours posing. And so I've been able to dedicate more time to other areas of my life. And it's just been incredible. And so I know that that's kind of a little bit of a trade-off, is like, you can spend your entire waking hours trying to have the best physique possible, but then if you don't have relationships, if you don't have friends and family, if you don't have a business, if you don't have anything to show for it, well, then what's the point? You look good, but what's the point of that if you don't have anything else?
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I can speak to like just dieting and how much of a toll it takes on your brain power. And the sad part is I don't really know, especially a lot of women who tend to undereat, they don't really realize like there is so much more potential there when you really do feed yourself like true maintenance calories. Like you have so much more energy, you have so much more productivity. And like I can tell night and day, like right now. And to be totally honest with you guys, like cutting right now, I crash really hard, like multiple times through my workday. And it takes a lot of willpower for me to like get through my 8 hours and put out my best for those 8 hours every single day that I work. And then I'm, logging off for the day at 4 or 5 p.m. And then I'm absolutely drained going to the gym. So like being in a deficit does take a toll. And like, even though you might not feel like it or notice it, most of the time what I realize is like a lot of people adapt to that as like their new normal. Like I remember I had a client once who started with me, and when she collected data on herself, she was eating like 1,000 calories per day and like 1,200. It's just like, the whole I forget to eat thing. And then like you have a regular dinner and then that just doesn't add up to a lot. And she mentioned how she just gets headaches normally. And like she was just like, yeah, like I just have a bunch of headaches, and like it was just such a normal thing for her. And I was like, okay. And we started upping her carbs, upping her strength training, upping her calories, got her up like 500 600 calories in a couple of weeks, and she was like, my headaches are gone, I'm sleeping well, I have energy. It's like that's what maintenance is. And that is like so powerful for like not only like having the time to let other areas of your life thrive, but like having the energy and the mental power to do so.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of a client who she wasn't eating too little, but I don't think she was eating enough. She wasn't like sub 1,000 or 1,200 calories, but over time we started reverse dieting, just building her food up, and she has maintained her weight and actually has just looked tighter and tighter and tighter, which is incredible. But it's the side effects of that additional food that have been the most exciting. And a couple of weeks ago, she was like, hey, this is going to be kind of a weird check-in. And I was like, okay, like why? And I was like reading and I was like, this doesn't seem too weird. But towards the end, she was like, I don't know like what's happened, but my libido is like through the roof. And she was like, I don't know if it's this or if it's this. And I'm like, that might be just a consequence of having more food, having more energy. And it's incredible for females. Like we have better memories. We don't have that kind of like diet brain or like prep brain that we like to call it. You have energy to focus in other areas of your life, and you might feel better hormonally. So it's like all of these things are just great for living a higher quality life.
Yeah, absolutely. And like your body likes to be at maintenance. Like this thought process that like you're either dieting on 1,500 calories or you're just not doing anything at all completely negates like what your body actually wants to be doing. And what it wants to be doing is to just be fueled well all the time. And I think most people miss out on that. And so hopefully like you want to try some kind of a maintenance phase after listening to this today.
Yeah, and ironically enough, I did a Facebook Live with my team, and we talked about the idea of that flexibility versus accuracy, and kind of have like and we've talked about this in a lot of different episodes, but there's a time when you need to be super, super accurate, and there's a time when you can implement a little bit of flexibility. And we talked about that dial and finding that spot in the middle where you can be responsible, but you can go out to happy hours. You can go on vacation and not have to stress, about being 100% accurate and being 100% on point to the point where you don't actually go out and live your life. And so you should be able to work fitness and your diet into your lifestyle and be able to find that happy medium. So you don't feel like you can actually spend time with your friends.
Oh yeah. And we kind of already talked about like how to find that balance and like what you can get away with and how flexible can you be when you're in maintenance. But it's really hard. I just want to rehash, like it's really hard to stay accountable when there's not that immediate goal in sight or something that you're really striving for in the moment. And I found that for most people, including myself, the maintenance phase takes more discipline than I guess maybe not more, but a different type of discipline than when you're dieting. Cause you're not doing everything quite to a T, but like, how do you find that happy medium? Like most people either thrive on extremes, and tend to struggle in that middle, like gray area, because you just don't know what's enough, what's too much, and really figuring out how you're doing with that. And I mean, I think we were talking about this off air, some strategies that we have to better hone in on that discipline during the maintenance phases. I know that one of them for me is having a really big long-term goal. So like my goal is to compete in 2023. So that'll be my third season and it'll be my fifth show. And it'll have been like 5 years since my last show when I do reach that point. And so having something like that in the far future really helps me to stay grounded and remember like, hey, I really don't want things to get super out of line. I want to stay disciplined to have this contribute to the bigger goal. But it's really hard to remember that sometimes. So, I mean, having some kind of a long-term goal is one way to do it, but not for everyone.
Yeah. And having a goal or having someone that you're able to check in with makes a really big difference as well. So someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, a spouse, someone that you're constantly checking in with and they're checking in on you and seeing how you're doing, if you need help or any of that, that can make a world of difference just having one person.
I will say it's really hard to have that person be your significant other, because like it can easily just feel like or turn into like judgment for a lot of couples. I've noticed in clients, like, do you think you should be eating that? Like going from one person to the other, like just doesn't come off well. And you're already
Yeah.
with them all the time. So like that probably is not going to benefit the relationship if you're just constantly like yelling at each other to stick to your macros or don't eat that or don't eat this. But it can be productive. I do think that, like, for example, like Christina and I will hold each other accountable in the off season or whatever we're doing. Like we'll send each other our check-in photos as well as our coaches, and we'll set goals with each other, talk about things. Like having a community is one of the most powerful things in being able to stick to your goals.
Yeah. So funny when you bring up the spouse thing. So yeah, it definitely can feel like nagging, or you can feel like there's more behind certain statements and there's hidden messages or meanings. But the other day, and I told you the exact same kind of structure that I wanted to give myself, because again, sometimes when you're in your off season, you're in that maintenance phase, you can have too much flexibility because you haven't had that, and so you're trying to just kind of enjoy it. But there can get to a point where again you have too much flexibility, and so I know I needed to kind of dial it back a little bit. And I was like, you know what, like I love drinking wine. I love beer. But I was like, you know what, it needs to be a special thing for me. And if I'm just constantly having a drink or two a night, it's just routine. And it doesn't give me that kind of I don't know, that special occasion. So I was like, you know what? I'm only going to drink on the weekends. Like it's really hard because I like having a beer or two with my husband or having a glass of wine with dinner, but I was like, I just need to reserve this for the weekend. So I told my husband that. I was like, these, I listed off a few other goals that I had. I said, but this is something that I really want to stick to. And so last night when we were having dinner, he was like, do you want a beer? And I kind of just sat there and I looked at him. I was like, yes. And he was like, but waiting till the weekend. And I was like, yes. And he was like, okay. And so he had one himself. And while it's like, of course, I want to be social and I want to have, and it's not to the point I'm trying to get trashed or anything, but it's just that like social component and being able to finally enjoy that because I was in prep for so long. But I just knew I had to stick to my goals. And he knew that that's what I wanted to do. He offered it and I wanted it. He knew I wanted it, but I still we were like, no. So, and he didn't pressure me. He wasn't like, oh, come on, because he was like, okay, like, I'm just asking, but it can work.
Oh yeah, and that's actually really funny. You made me think of one thing that Erin and I do, and it's like when we're tracking our macros or like whatnot, like especially during my maintenance phase, it's a little bit harder for me to do this, but he'll ask, do you want one of these? And it might be a cookie or it might be a drink or it might be something, and I go, I want one.
Yeah.
But I don't need one. And so I'll say
Yeah.
that out loud, and like it's just kind of funny. So that's like our thing now. So we'll say that when we're offering something to each other, but it's like, I definitely want that, but like that just doesn't fit the bill for today. So that, and you actually made me think of something with that just whole dynamic of like, okay, it needs to be special. And this is really tricky because when you come out of a diet, you haven't had a lot of things for a long time. And obviously we can combat some of that with flexible dieting. Like you can incorporate things like alcohol, you can incorporate things like your favorite foods. And one thing that I talk about all the time with my clients is like, let's have something that kicks your sweet tooth every single day, that dessert every day, fitting it into your numbers. But at a certain point, certain things they're just not worth it, right? So it might not be worth it to have a full 16-ounce craft beer once a week if your calories are really low, or it might not be worth it to have a full chocolate chip cookie every single day. Maybe you're kicking your sweet tooth with something else, right? And so when you come out of that diet, it's really hard to not want to indulge like on everything, but it does come with time. So when a maintenance phase comes around, and you're reverse dieting and then you find your maintenance and then you're sitting there for a while, it might take some time to like lose that lust for like all those things that you were missing out on. Like you might make mistakes at first by over consuming those things that you were missing out on. And then over time, they just get a little bit less special. And that's okay to an extent. Like, you want to save things to be special on the weekends or like have that balance. But I think it's important that the longer that you are in maintenance, the less those like taboo foods have that appeal that makes you want to really overconsume them. So, I mean, that just highlights the importance of staying in a maintenance phase until you aren't so food focused.
And that made me think of prep when you and I first started prep back in like 2015, 16, 17. I feel like maybe 17 had backed off a little bit, but those years I feel like everyone was like super food focused on like what they were going to eat, and they were just torturing themselves looking at all these like extravagant cheat meals and cheat foods and cookies and all this stuff, and you can get hyper focused on certain food items. And so I would definitely say when you come out of a diet, it is normal to be like, I haven't had chocolate chip cookies, or if I haven't had sushi, I haven't had pizza, and you crave a lot of these things. And to have something coming out of a diet, not to blow all your progress, but once you start to kind of reverse diet, those foods just become less and less tempting, or I don't know, I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but you don't crave them as bad. It's just kind of like, oh, I could have some sushi, but I don't know, it could fit my macros, but I'm not craving it the way I was before. So it is uh, good to indulge, but then try to kind of come back into your reverse diet and sit there and build up your food a little bit more. And then those cravings will probably go away after a while because they're just not as, it's something, I think it's because it's like you can have them, you can fit into your food, into your macros, but when you can't, you want it so much more.
Yeah. And remembering that it'll be there. Like
Always.
remembering that if you crave something, you could have it today and maybe that puts you over your budget for the day. But what if you just said, I'll just have it tomorrow and make sure I plan it in right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be super powerful. So yeah, everything you just said there, 100% agree with all of that. And, just remembering that it will be there through. And again, that emphasizes the importance of staying in a maintenance phase for long enough, and to, I guess, kind of cap this conversation off, how long should you stay in a maintenance phase? The general recommendation we like to give is as long, up to twice as long or longer than your diet was. So if you dieted for 6 months, it's ideal to stay out of a diet for a year, but at least stay out of it for 6 months post diet. Or if you dieted for 8 weeks, then try it for 16 weeks in a maintenance phase or longer. You can always go longer. You don't have to cut once you hit that threshold, I promise. But you want to essentially try to double that time.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything else to add. I think that was a pretty good overview.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this one to come out, and it'll be coming out very soon because we're recording the week prior, and I think you all are really gonna like this one.
Yeah, so we hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Chrissy Lynn Fit, and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back.